I first realised the value of personal branding about 8 years ago. I was giving a presentation at a small event, and the host of the event introduced me by referring to a book that I'd written for IBM a few years previously, and the effect that that book had had on transforming his understanding of the topic of the book. I was very struck by that. I hadn't realised that the fact that I was the author of that work had particularly been noticed. And it struck me that an opportunity had been missed. The book had had a really positive reception, but we'd missed the opportunity for people who'd appreciated the book to interact with me and the other authors of it personally. And that's an opportunity to create business value, to create new customer contacts, new opportunities to do work. And so in subsequent roles, I was much more conscious of the value of making my contribution to the field that I was working in clear. And I've done that through public speaking, but also through social media. Social media is a great tool to help us realise synergies between a personal brand and a corporate brand these days. We're used to using social media in our everyday lives, and it gives us the opportunity not just to receive messages from corporations and institutions, but to interact with individuals who work for the companies and organisations that we interact with. And I think the different types of brands have different values. A corporate brand can create a lot of attention. Corporate brands have great resources behind them, so to capture people's attention. But then once you have that attention, a personal brand associated with it can deliver a different sort of value. People appreciate the honesty and personal insight of interacting with an individual, and I think they can develop a different sort of trust with an individual who works for an organisation than they can with the organisation itself directly. And so I think that's been of great value to me. It was of great value to IBM when I worked for them, and it's starting to become of great value to Amy. And I've constructed the brand through various components. So certainly social media has a role to play, and they're a very strong role to play. In particular, focusing on interacting through Twitter and LinkedIn on work topics, and keeping any personal material to a different set of social media environments, largely Facebook in my case. And I think that really gets respect from people in our customers and our marketplace influencers who interact using the same channels and appreciate seeing focused communication and engagement through them. Brand is also about content, and so the tool that's been enormously valuable to me there has been my personal blog, The Urban Technologist. That gives me the environment in which I can develop arguments, I can publish those arguments, I can then use related tools like LinkedIn to point people at those arguments, develop a discussion around them. That helps me develop my thinking. It shows that I'm willing to engage in an open debate, and that critical mass of content then becomes something that adds value to my personal brand. It's not just a posture. There's some content to it, something there for people to get to grips with. I think then the perhaps final part of it is something to do with personal appearance. One summer a few years ago, I happened to start wearing a light coloured linen suit. It was just comfortable, but I realised that people noticed it and they started to associate it with me. It happens to be in the photograph of me that's on my blog page now, so that then links my online persona to my persona in real life, and people recognise me at conferences, at industry events because of that. I've even had a situation where I gave a presentation at a conference, and as I was walking off stage I heard someone remark, "I've just seen the Urban Technologist speak," because they've made the link to the linen suit. So I'm not necessarily suggesting everyone adopts my style of clothing, but there is certainly something to think about there in the presentation of personal brand. And so I think that gives us sort of an idea, I hope, of how I found those tools useful in developing a personal brand that's valuable to me and valuable to a business. It's a combination of content and engagement and focus. It's a tool for developing a distinctive voice. this. And what you get from it is, I think, a lot of interest, but also customer opportunities. I was invited to meet with customers in Saudi Arabia, in the UK, in all sorts of places who had read the material on my blog. I've been invited to speak at conferences throughout Europe, including some amazing opportunities to speak at a United Nations Commission, and to meet Ward Cunningham, the inventor of the wiki, and Al Gore, the ex-Vice President of the US States. These are not things I ever imagined would happen to me, but they happened through developing a personal brand and engaging online. In terms of any advice I'd offer to people thinking about getting started in this, then in terms of the online engagement, just get started and think small. Experiment with Twitter, with LinkedIn, with the various forms of social media that are out there. Things like Pinterest and Instagram are very popular at the moment, and find the one that works with you, but always at the back of your mind have that thought about focus. What would people in this medium want to engage with me about if it's not just a purely personal socializing experience? So that was really important to me. Then in the real world, in terms of public speaking interviews, it's increasingly common to be offered to speak on podcasts or be videoed for online magazines. An environment that I found very helpful to get started in that sort of activity was to volunteer to speak at schools and universities. They're always incredibly keen to have people from industry to come talk to them, and it's at once a safe and a challenging environment. You will find that students ask all sorts of fascinating and challenging questions, but you're free to answer them without the sort of concern you might have for commercial issues and confidentiality that you would have if you were speaking to a customer or somewhere that competitors are present. So I found that a really helpful and useful environment in which to get more comfortable speaking and communicating in this way. And so I think to try to sum all of that up, personal branding for me is not a marketing tool or a facade. It's about recognizing that if you want to have impact, you need to use these tools that are available to us now to communicate to people what you're capable of doing, how you see the world, how you see your industry, and in particular be aware how you're going to be perceived through those tools. That's why it's important to have a focus about how you use the different channels. And finally, I'd say it can be fantastically rewarding to do this. I've given you a small idea of some of the amazing experiences I've had through doing this, not least leading to the conversations that led me to taking this job at Amey.